Welcome to The Explainer. All right, let's get right into it. Today we're looking at one of the biggest stories playing out in global diplomacy right now, India's incredible, and very sudden, surge in making international deals, and what it all tells us about its ambitions on the world stage. Seriously, just take a look at this timeline. In just the last 8 months, India has been on an absolute diplomatic whirlwind, signing at least 9 major agreements all across the globe. We're talking from Europe to Oceania. This isn't just a busy calendar. No, this is a full-on strategic push that has the rest of the world sitting up and paying very close attention.
So that brings us to the big question, right? What on earth is fueling this incredible flurry of activity? Is this the moment India finally opens up to the world in a big way? And maybe more importantly, what does this strategy tell us about the role it's trying to carve out for itself in our, let's face it, very rapidly changing world?
To really get what's going on, we first have to talk about a huge shift that's happening in the global economy. It's a trend that, as it turns out, has put India in a very powerful position. It all comes down to a concept known as the China Plus One strategy. You see, for decades, it felt like the global supply chain was basically a one-way street, and that street led right through China. But with all the geopolitical tensions and economic shakiness lately, relying so heavily on one country has started to look like a huge risk. So now, pretty much everyone, from giant corporations to entire governments, is scrambling to find an alternative. And boom, this is where India steps right into the spotlight. And look, it's not just that it has this massive and growing market. For a lot of Western countries, India just seems like a more stable, more reliable partner, a democratic counterweight in the region. It's positioning itself perfectly as that essential plus one.
But hold on, this is about way more than just economics. It's also a masterclass in geopolitical strategy. And honestly, there is no better example of this than a defense pact that was recently signed with Greece.
Now, at first glance, it looks pretty standard, right? It's a defense deal, it's about strengthening military ties, and sure, there's a little bit of that old, the enemy of my enemy is my friend logic going on. Both India and Greece have, let's say, complicated relationships with Turkey, which is a key ally of Pakistan. But if you look just a little bit closer, you'll see there's a much bigger game unfolding here. Because hiding underneath that military pact is this huge rivalry, two totally competing visions for how to connect Asia to Europe. It's like a new great game of global infrastructure for the 21st century. So, on one side, you've got China's colossal Belt and Road Initiative, and now a new contender has just stepped into the ring, IMEC, the India-Middle East-Europe corridor. India and Greece are the strategic bookends of this whole ambitious project, and it's a direct challenge to China's dominance. But, like with any grand plan, there's a catch. And here's where things get really complicated. The main port, the gateway for IMEC into Europe, the port of Piraeus in Greece, well, it turns out that 67% of it is owned by a Chinese state-controlled shipping company. Yeah, that's a huge potential roadblock for this brand new corridor. So, you see, the defense deal isn't just about defense. It's about building political trust and creating leverage. India is basically playing the long game, working to make sure its gateway to Europe is reliable and isn't vulnerable to Chinese economic pressure. It is a really smart strategic play. Now, it's not just the sheer number of deals India's making, it's the quality of its negotiations. And a recent trade agreement with the United States is a perfect showcase of this newfound diplomatic skill. This is fascinating. If you dig into the fine print of the final fact sheet, you find these subtle yet really significant changes in the wording. The word commits was softened to the non-binding intends. A firm promise to scrap digital taxes was dialed back to just a commitment to negotiate. And they even quietly inserted protections for India's very politically sensitive farming sector. Every single one of these little edits represents a major diplomatic win.
As one analyst put it so well, these edits are clear signs of India's effective diplomacy. They show a country that is skillfully protecting its own interests, from its farmers all the way to its digital economy, while still managing to forge these powerful global partnerships. And it really seems like the US is finally getting the message.
So let's zoom out. What's the big picture here? What do all of these deals, from Greece to the US, actually add up to? Well, they all point toward a broader and very distinct vision for India's place in the world. India is actively pushing for what's called a multipolar world. That is, a world with many centers of power, not just one that revolves around Washington and Beijing. It operates with strategic autonomy, forming these clever issue-based coalitions to get specific things done. And it's rallying other so-called middle powers who are also getting wary of the unpredictability of the traditional superpowers. And this brings us to a really fascinating idea. The goal for India isn't necessarily to become a superpower in that old-school dominant way, like the US or China. Instead, its intention is to become what one analyst calls a friendly power, a leader that builds partnerships based on mutual interest and trust.
It represents a fundamentally different approach to global leadership, one that's based on inclusivity rather than dominance. And it really leaves us with a final thought to consider. In a world that seems to be increasingly defined by the rivalry of giants, can a rising friendly power actually show a new way forward?